So recently, over a few years, indie games seem to have blown up in the internet, and everyone's talking about it. And there are a few reasons behind it, mainly because the big corporate game development industries don't really seem to care about the player experience. Rather than that, they just want to make a lot of money out of the microtransactions and those huge price tags. A good example of it is the Cyberpunk and also the Assassin's Creed series, which literally turned down its original identity to a sort of like Witcher clone just to get those microtransactions and that money on their pocket. However, we're not talking about that thing. What we're talking about in today's video is water. Now, water is a seamlessly harmless looking thing. Of course, it's just harmless, right? Water can't do anything, it's necessary for you to live. However, from a developer's perspective, if you're like working on a game or so, water can be the most difficult thing to code if you're adding water into your game. So this is what I'm talking about. Recent indie game titles don't seem to have water in their game. The main reason behind that is because it's too time consuming to actually code water in their game, and water is, I think, for me at least, it's like the most hardest thing to code in a game to make it actually feel like it's water. There are a lot of parts of creating water, like there can be a lot of variations, such as making the water look good but not actually allowing the player to interact with it. But then again, that just kind of ruins the fun. But I've seen a lot of games having, like, the big games having water in them, but only a few of them got it right. And a good example of it is the Forza Horizon 5, and there are like literally a lot of examples, but the Forza Horizon 5 had this like really cool water effect. Okay, let's first talk about why indie game developers ignore water. Most of the indie games you can find on itch or any other platform will not actually have water in them, and even if they do have water in them, the player will be restricted from getting access towards it. And even if the player does have access towards it, the water doesn't really feel realistic or doesn't really feel like it's actually water. The reason behind that is, like I said, it's like, I don't know, it's tremendously difficult to code water and make the physics work accordingly to water. You heard of the game called The First Tree? Yeah, it's a game that was really successful, like, for it, like from an indie perspective. It actually got a PS4 release, Nintendo Switch release, etc., etc. So the developer himself did say that he was trying to make like the wolf in the game swim in the water, but he didn't really like get it right. Now this is a very good example of it. Small indie developers or small game developers don't really get that freedom. Like, they don't really have that access, or they don't really have that time to like make water accessible for the character to access with. And even if they do, it's really hard to like code water physics, water swimming, etc., etc. And if you're an indie game developer, you would definitely want to ignore that when you can just get away with simply not letting the player get into the water at all. But on the other hand, big corporate game development companies such as Ubisoft or Microsoft, they cannot get across this problem. So I've never really seen like any game fully able to create a water that feels better than real life. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but yes. So a few example of it that I'm gonna show right now is this game, like Forza Horizon 5, that's it. But there's another game. This one I personally played myself and finished it, and everyone knows this game. It's Assassin's Creed 4. Oh, the good times when Assassin's Creed was like Assassin's Creed and not some shitty Witcher clone or something. Now, Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed Rogue even had water scenes in them, but Assassin's Creed 4 was the one that actually sparked the light. Like, it ignited the creation of water, the sea level, and everything else in it. Now, the water in this game was surprisingly good, like if you consider how old this game really is. And the fights in the water, when you were like in your pirate ship fighting with some different enemies and stuff on the sea, they're actually pretty good. Now, this is completely shown at the very first, like the starting sequence of the game, when you're like, fighting a few pirates while being like, on a thunderstorm or something like that. This is displayed with the game's amazing graphics quality and the variation between waters and the water physics itself. The game did have some moments where you could actually dive underwater, but there weren't like a lot of them, and you would be limited to the environment. But still, that doesn't really change the fact that how good the water looked in this game. Assassin's Creed was like a really big part of the developing the open world idea towards other game developers. Since the years it has lost that, but still Assassin's Creed 4 remains one of the best games that I've played, and the water in this game is just truly mind-blowing. Now on Assassin's Creed 4 you do get to interact with the water itself, but there are other type of game which have water but the player doesn't actually get to fully interact with it themselves. A good example of it is the Sea of Thieves. Now this game had mind-blowing looking water. Like, that game had so much depth in the water. I mean, it's a game about being in the sea of filled with thieves driving a pirate ship, so of course it would have very good water physics in it, but it just felt real life, even though it was like not realistic. I mean, it was realistic, but the look of it was stylized. The water did feel like, I don't know how am I supposed to explain it. They somehow managed to make the water feel like wavy in real life while playing a video game. I don't even know if that made any sense, but it just looked so good. Okay, so but you don't actually get to physically interact with it. You're in a ship, but you can still feel it. So Sea of Thieves, this has to be the best. Oh my god, what the hell was that? Anyway, so this game has to be the best game that I've seen with so far such good level of water detail. But on the topic of open world games, let's move on to a different game. Another game from the Ubisoft series, or Ubisoft, I don't know, I don't know, is the Watch Dogs series. Now, let's not talk about the recent Watch Dogs Legion. Rather, let's go a few years back and talk about the original Watch Dogs release and the Watch Dogs 2. We can also talk about the Crew 2, but that's a different thing. But the original Watch Dogs had such good level of water detail. It was so good. The cloth drying physics, and this, I don't know, I can't explain, but it just looks too good. On the subject of that, we have another game. We all have heard about this game. It's literally GTA 5. Now the water isn't that good, but then again, the way that it interacts with it, the wave, the foam, and everything makes it look so realistic. So yeah, I guess now you have your answer why the indie game development industry doesn't really care about water. It's simply because it's too hard to code, and nobody wants to waste most of their time just making like a water that the player will just be like, oh, that looks really cool, that's just a water, but yeah, let's ignore it. I mean, it looks good, but it's really not part of the game or anything, so oh my god, that looks good, but that's all there is to it. So I don't really see someone like who's working his full time on a game developing, like developing a game, someone one man army. I don't know what I'm saying, but I don't really see an indie game developer wasting his precious time behind something that's purely for cosmetics or the look of its game. I mean, they do waste it of the look of the game, but water just feels like a insignificant yet a significant impact over the game itself, and that it's something that can only be done by big corporate game industries and not an indie game developer. Though if you are making a game that has something to do with the water itself, then you might actually separately code the entire water physics, the water system, the waves, and so many etc. But let me tell you, there's a lot to code. There's literally the entire physics system, the swimming system, then there's the foam, then there's the wave system, then there's the random noise system. You might use Perlin noise and stuff, but it's still very difficult to procedurally create water that reacts to every single move the player itself makes. And most of the indie games don't seem to use a lot of procedural system in them, unless they're like really good level of indie games. I'm not really talking about them. I'm talking about what most indie developers make. So yeah, if I'm an indie developer, I would definitely ignore water because it's just too time consuming. But yeah, anyway, that's all there is to it.